Time as they head back to their seats this morning. And several of these guys, they're already serving in some capacity here at our church. And, I praise the Lord for how he's worked in their life. I'm thankful for Joseph and Jessica and Nick and the work that they put in and helping our youth ministry. Also because of that, because we have so many people moving up, I want to be aware that we do have, again, a young adult class that meets on Sunday. And Lewis heads that up. That meets over in the classroom facility. And also, we're starting a young adult Bible study on Wednesday night. Just like the teens have a youth hour, we're going to continue having a young adult hour. And Riley and Bears, they're heading that up and having a Bible study for everybody being able to be part of that. So don't miss out and being able to connect that way. So we're going to go and hop into our message. James chapter 1. While you're turning to James 1, I want to say... let's give a quick announcement for this. We try to provide resources for everybody, for all different stages of life, and just being able to be a help for our church. And for the last several weeks, we've been hitting on these topics for a gospel-centered home. And we're about halfway through. And because of that, I want to say that next week we'll have an option available, and it's a gospel-centered home, cultivating a home that reflects the gospel. And that's going to be available in the foyer. And all proceeds for these things go to the building fund. So if you purchase one of these books, it goes to the building fund. So if you want to pick one of those up, that'll be available next week. And I had to have my wife proof it before we put it out. So James chapter 1, we're going to hit a common conflict in all relationships. So if you're not married today, realize that this is not just, oh, well, I'm not married, so this doesn't apply to me. This applies to every relationship. Whether you are married or dating, or wanting to cultivate a good relationship with another person, and that is how to resolve conflict God's way. And some of you guys could have very easily made your way to church this morning and had arguments with your spouse or your parents or a friend, and coming to church, just because you come to church does not mean you don't have any conflicts, doesn't mean you don't have any issues. You could have got an argument with your parents or your siblings or your spouse this morning, and then on the way to church, you're doing everything you can to be like, just put on a good face today. One of the routines that I do every Sunday morning is if my wife's not in the car at 8 o'clock, since I live 2 minutes away, I leave, and then she'll meet us at church. And that's just an agreement because sometimes it takes her a little bit longer to get ready. Well, today it was 8 minutes past when I typically leave, and I chose to not leave because I knew I had to preach this topic, and I couldn't have an argument with my spouse the morning I got to preach this topic on conflict resolution. But James chapter 1, verse 19, let's read that passage. James 1:19, it says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." So, and it's your communication in any relationship. It doesn't fall apart just because I had a shouting match. So avoiding shouting matches doesn't mean that you have a good communication. They're about using words that reflect Christ. And as we've talked about this, a home is supposed to reflect the gospel, the love that Christ has for the church. That was what we talked about. And in here, the question is not, are we having arguments and conflict? Conflicts happen in any relationship that you have. Conflict is not proof that a home is broken or a relationship is broken. I have talked to people who were dating and said, "Oh, we had an argument. Does that mean that we're not a good match?" No, it's normal to have conflicts in any relationship because you have two imperfect people coming together and trying to have a good relationship, whether it's a friendship or a marriage or a relationship with family. But every family, every relationship is going to face conflict. So just because you have a conflict does not mean that it's all bad. We are imperfect people who share a home, and differences are going to surface. And that's just reality. So that's not the real issue. If you have a relationship and it's like, well, me and my siblings always have arguments. Me and my parents always have arguments. Me and my spouse or my girlfriend, my fiance or whoever it is, we always have arguments. That doesn't mean that the home is broken. Conflicts are normal. That's not the real issue. The real issue is, how do you choose to handle those things? Because the enemy doesn't need a plate-throwing argument to destroy a home. The devil is completely content with cold silences, you rolling your eyes, buried resentments, sharp, careless words that are said. Those things are what destroys a home and a relationship. So when you let communication break down, then trust begins to erode and unity in that relationship begins to collapse. So this is important. So like I said, whether you are in a dating relationship or you are married, how do you resolve conflict God's way? And by the way, the better you learn how to do this prior to marriage, the better it is after you get married. Because Scripture gives orders about how God's people are to listen and speak and solve problems. So we're taking this one verse and we're going to dissect all of it, intentionally saying the question is not, am I going to ever have a disagreement? I meet people that say, well, I met an individual, this gentleman, he's single and he's looking for a wife, and I said, well, what is it that you look for in a spouse? He's like, I just want two things. She has to be attractive and she better cooperate. I'm like, bro, you are going to be single for a long time. If that is the expectation, you're going to be single for an extremely long time. Conflicts are going to take place in any relationship. The question is whether you let Christ lead or you let your emotions take over and destroy your relationships. Have you ever met somebody that no matter the relationship they have, they say, well, people stop being friends with me because I'm an honest person? You ever met anybody like that? Well, I'm just honest, and that's why people don't like me. He's like, no, people don't like you because you're a jerk. That's it. It's not because you're honest. You could be extremely honest and still maintain good relationships and resolve conflicts. So let's pray real quick and we'll hop into our text. Lord, I pray you speak to our hearts today. I pray that you help us to have healthy conflict resolution. And Lord, whether it is in a dating relationship or friendships or work relationships or more importantly, our marriage and our family, Lord, I pray you help us to take these things and apply it to our relationships. Because, Lord, you want something better than what the world has to offer. Lord, I pray you speak to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's read verse 19 again. It says, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. So that's number one. We see God's communication pattern. The way God is asking us to communicate with every person. That's important for marriage, but for every relationship. James lays God's communication pattern out in one sentence. This wasn't really a suggestion he's giving. This is a command in which we're supposed to talk. A command of God's communication pattern. And most of us, we get this backwards. When we're typically, we speak quickly, and we get angry quickly, and we listen slowly, if at all. We don't listen very often. Because every time a conflict arises, we want to score points, we want to get our points across, we want to be able to win the argument. You know, when Holly and I first got married, I did a lot of debating in high school, and I thought that the point of conflict resolution is you debate to the point of you win them over to your opinion and side. So when Holly and I got married, I wasn't trying to argue. I wasn't trying to be difficult. My intention is I'm going to let you understand my point so I can win you to my side. And I quickly found out that that doesn't work. God's communication pattern says that we speak slowly. We speak slowly, we listen quickly, and we get angry slowly. So, you know, we see in this pattern, first of all, listening comes first. Listening always comes first. Being quick to listen means that you're trying to understand rather than just to win. And now most of us, when we have arguments with somebody, we just want to win. That's kind of the whole point. We get in arguments, we want to win. And most people we just don't listen. And this is across the board. None of us listen. When a friend gets mad at us, we don't listen. When our boss gets mad at us, we don't listen. When people get upset with us, our relationships fall apart, our children, our spouse, our parents, whatever it is, we just don't listen. Most of us don't listen. We wait for our turn to talk in the situation, right? That's why you listen, and then when you hear something, you instantly mark down, it's like, okay, I'm going to respond to that. I want my turn to talk. And that's why so many conversations feel like interrogations when trials come up, when difficulties arise. So listening comes first. In counseling, I see it played out all the time. What happens is a couple will sit down, and the wife will say that I feel this way. They'll typically say, they describe a hurt, and then the other jumps in, and they'll start trying to justify it or correct it or counterattack. And then the issue that's now there, it shifts from how can we understand each other and do better in our relationship to, hey, who's going to win this round? Because I'm going to win here. I want to make sure that he doesn't think that I'm as bad as what she's saying I am, or vice versa. And when you refuse to listen, when you have relationships that have trials, when you refuse to listen, it's not that you're being impatient. What you're saying is being right matters more than being reconciled to a person that I care about. When we choose to argue back and forth without listening, most of us will say, oh, he's just impatient. He's got to get his word in. It's like, no, you care more about being right than to reconcile a relationship that you care about. And I think we've all been there a time or two. We would never say, oh, I don't care about that relationship. No, but we care more about being right in that moment. Whether it's, like I said, a girlfriend or a friend or a parent, we want to be right. We want to win that round. I said most homes don't shrink because most homes, people shrink when problems shrink when people feel understood. If you have problems and they understand you and they're listening, those problems aren't mountains anymore. They're typically become molehills. And disagreements may stay. Conflicts will still happen. But listening begins to slow those things down. So listening comes first. Listening comes first, and then after that, speaking needs some discernment. How many's ever just said the first thing that pops in your mind? You know how often I bite my tongue? I want to say something, and I just bite my tongue. Now, that might be with my family. It might be here. It might be in speaking to another individual. Whatever, I have something that pops in my head, and my flesh tells me I'm going to say it. And then I bite my tongue. Now, some of you guys might not think I bite my tongue, but I actually do bite my tongue. But speaking needs some discernment. So this doesn't mean that you're avoiding difficult conversations or not willing to address certain things. It means that you're not just going to fire off words without thinking. Because typically what happens, you get to this and you start saying crazy things back and forth, goes back and forth, and then at the end of a conflict, you sit down and say, hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. How many's ever had to say the words, I didn't mean it? You know you meant it. We don't want to admit that we meant it, but you meant it. In the heat of that moment, you said it. It's like a tube of toothpaste. When you squeeze the tube of toothpaste, you can't put all that toothpaste back in it. So I shave with a straight razor on my neck and my cheeks, things like that, and it's very sharp. So it sits in my drawer in my bathroom, and I buy this expensive toothpaste. It's fluoride free because I don't want to become mentally handicapped by consuming fluoride. So I dropped it in my drawer in my bathroom, and it sliced open. The whole tube sliced open. Well, I'm not throwing that tube away. Like I said, it's an expensive toothpaste. It's fluoride-free toothpaste. That's like $10 for a little tiny tube of toothpaste. So I'm keeping it. The issue is that every time I pick that thing up, more toothpaste just squeezes out of it. And I still have this toothpaste, by the way. It is in my drawer right now with everything around it covered in toothpaste. To the point where I'm picking that thing up and the toothpaste was all on the outside. I squeeze it. It used to come out the front. Now it comes out the side, and I just kind of wipe my toothbrush on it because I'm not going to throw it away. But the point is the moment that it came out, it got everywhere, and it's not going back in. And that's how typically, when we speak without discernment, that's what happens. It becomes messy. It becomes gross. It gets everywhere. It gets sticky. My kids open up the drawer in my bathroom, and they're like, why is there white stuff all over? I'm like, that's toothpaste. They're like, why do you have toothpaste everywhere, Dad? Why? Because just like that toothpaste, I squeezed it, and it all came out and got everywhere. Most of us will say, I didn't mean it. You know, that can't erase what was said. That's not going to erase it, because at the end of the day, you did mean it. That was what's in the heart. Scripture says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So to say things without discernment and then to go back and say, well, I just didn't mean it, So no, you meant it, you just didn't mean to vocalize it. That's why it's important in every relationship to speak with some discernment. The Bible's not telling you to stay silent in hard times. That's not the point. If there's a conflict, you need to address the conflict. But it does tell you, it talks about your timing, your tone, your motive. A gentle question that I typically ask would be like, can we talk about this tomorrow when I'm rested? Why? Because now I know, like, if I'm tired, there's certain times I'm not wanting to have a conversation. Or if somebody contacts me and says, Pastor, I need to talk to you. I'm mad about something. Well, guess what? It's like, okay, can we set a time to talk about that rather than right now? Why? Because I want to make sure that I have prayed and that the words that I'm going to say are spirit-filled. You know, that might not really feel satisfying in a moment, but that definitely protects your relationships that you have with your kids, with your parents, with your girlfriend, with your spouse. So speaking needs discernment. Then next, let's look at Proverbs 5, verse 1. Proverbs 15, verse 1. It says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. A soft answer turns away wrath. So we see that this isn't just speaking about our speaking needs discernment, but it talks about our tone. That's our fire starter that we typically forget about. You can say the same things and it mean completely different. Just because words come out of your mouth doesn't mean it's going to be received the same way. If I walk up to my wife and say, honey, you look beautiful today, or I go, well, that looks beautiful. I said the same thing, but I think everybody would tell me, he's like, what do you mean that looks beautiful? What are you trying to say? Why? There's a tone. A soft answer turns away wrath. So words will either build up a relationship or destroy a relationship. Now, those are words, but tones reveal what's in the heart when words are finished. Truth delivered with a hammer gets hammered back, and then we get upset when they hammer back. If you have a conflict and you speak into that relationship with harsh words and you hammer it down, like, well, what I said was true. Yeah, and then when somebody hammers right back, then you'd be, well, I can't believe they said that. Truth delivered like a hammer is going to get hammered back. Hard truths can be received with respect and gentleness. I can give truth without having to destroy a relationship. So most arguments in home aren't issues. Most arguments in home do not start because the issue is huge. Anyone who's been married for any length of time knows that the majority of your arguments are not huge arguments. They're little arguments. Every relationship you have, typically they're tiny arguments when you have them. And by the way, think about this. Your spouse is the only one who actually chose to love you. Now, that doesn't really sound that great, but your parents, they had to love you, right? They gave birth to you, they raised you, they have to love you. Your children love you because you're their parent and you provide for them. They didn't really have a choice. Your spouse is the only person in this world that has made the choice to be like, yep, I love that person. Their whole being, that's who I love. I'm going to choose to love them. My parents had an obligation to love me. Pity on my parents. My children love me because I provide for them. My wife is the only one who has actually chosen to love me for me. That tells you her taste, I guess. I don't know. But in that, we realize that arguments don't start because issues are huge. Typically, they're little arguments. Relationships all come by little arguments. It's always little things that don't matter. And in there, it's typically things that we start saying, oh, you didn't pick up the dish. You didn't put away the dishes. You didn't take out the trash. I can't believe you didn't sweep the floor. I'm not your maid. All of these things come out, and issues aren't huge, but they're spoken with a tone that says, hey, you are my enemy. And they're not your enemy. And you know, what that means is when we speak, before a word even comes out, we instantly say that person's my enemy right now because I'm angry. And that can be a raised voice, it can be a scoff, it can be an eye roll. All of that says, hey, you're the problem, instead of, hey, we have a problem. And how do you address the problems? So this is God's communication pattern. After that, let's look at Ephesians 4:26. Ephesians 4:26, it says, and be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to the devil. See, we can be angry and not sin. You can be angry at problems in a relationship, but that doesn't lead us to always sin. So, here, what are the dangers of unresolved anger in our relationships? The dangers of unresolved anger. Well, first of all, anger invites our enemy. Anger shows up in every house. That's just normal. Every relationship, you're going to have a time where you get angry. Whether you are dating or married, or you've been married for a month, or you've been married for decades, you're going to get angry. That's just the reality. Two imperfect people coming together and having a relationship. Anger shows up in every relationship, but unresolved anger invites bitterness and division. And the longer that you hold on to that, the uglier it gets. That's why you can typically look at a person and say, that person struggles with anger. That person's a bitter person. That's why every relationship they have falls apart. Why? Because they've allowed bitterness to take root and control everything about their life. You know, this doesn't mean that, again, we're not going to ever be angry, but this means that delaying the conflict doesn't make it just disappear. Most of us say, well, if I just ignore it, then disappear. I have noticed that trend for young millennials and Gen Zers, we will just, you know what, if I don't want to do it, I'm just going to ignore it. And if I ignore it, then maybe one day it'll go away. Look, ignoring problems don't go away. Delay doesn't make things disappear. Actually, all it does is make time for things to grow and get deeper and take bigger root. And what's not dealt with today is going to always be exaggerated tomorrow. That's why every time you have an argument, you have to go and say, well, you did this 6 months ago. Well, you did this. You did this a year ago. And when things when we wait to speak about it, it's not dealt with when it happens. It gets exaggerated tomorrow. Facts get fuzzy. Motives get assigned. Things that weren't ever really there. We build this around the small issue that we had. And then these small offenses get fused into one big story. And you hear the quote, well, you always do this. You never do that. Every time, that is what takes place. And then hearts get hardened, walls go up, and relationships start to fall apart because how we have chosen to allow anger to invite our enemy into our heart. Ephesians 4, verse 31 and 32. He says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. So anger is pretty much like a flare-up of what took place. When something wrong happened, that anger is a flare-up of what happened. So you're going to end up getting angry. But bitterness, that is the choice that you make in that moment. There's a difference between bitterness and godly anger. Anger, held close, is always going to turn into bitterness, and bitterness poisons every relationship that you have, no matter who they are, no matter how long you've had that relationship. So Paul's anecdote here is not, hey, you know what? You should just try a little bit harder to be nice. Now, that's not what Paul said. He didn't say, hey, you know what? If you're just a little bit nicer, then all these problems will go away. No, what he said was, remember how much Christ forgave you. Because your relationship's supposed to mirror Christ in the church. He says, remember how much God forgave you and what he's done with your sin. You know, the more that we are aware of how much we have been forgiven, the less room we have to be able to cling onto the grudges that destroy our life. When we live our life with understanding the grace that God gave us, we can be a lot more gracious to other people. You know, we see here in this danger of unresolved anger that there's bitterness that takes root. Anger is going to happen, but he gives us a little bit in Ephesians 4:29. Let's read verse 29. He says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is the use of edifying. We're going to stop there. No corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is to the use of edifying. So what does edifying mean? Edifying means to build up, which means that every time I speak, my goal is to build up. That doesn't always mean that it's pleasant, but it means that the goal is to help them be a better person. Now, most of the time when we have arguments, our goal is to win, and therefore it tears them down. It tears the other person down. So in this, in understanding what anger takes place, what happens, well, we see that he says no corrupt communication. What does corrupt mean? Corrupt means rotten or spoiled or foul. This week it's the first week of summer, so the kids are at home, and we got up in the morning. They wanted breakfast, so they said they wanted a bowl of cereal. So I'm like, fine, I got a bowl of cereal. So I grabbed this jug of milk out of the fridge. I didn't check the date. I opened it up. I smelled something. I didn't think anything of it. I poured it into the cereal bowl for the kids, and they start eating. And Danielle looks at me and says, "This milk tastes funny." I'm like, but you're still eating it. So I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Well, then I went and I drank like 6 raw eggs every morning with some milk, and I went and I put all those eggs in, and I poured that milk in, and I smelt it, and I'm like, these eggs are really bad. And then I smelled like a jug, and I realized it had curdles in the bottom of it. So I ran to the kids. I'm like, give me back those bowls. You're not eating that. We're going to have to get something else and get an upset stomach. It's foul. It's bad. It's rotten. It's spoiled. Now, most of the time when we speak and a trial comes up, a difficulty comes up, we get angry, we begin speaking things that are spoiled to the person that we care about the most in that situation. So corrupt means it's rotten, it's spoiled, it's foul. And God is being blunt here. He's saying there is no place for that kind of communication to take place in any godly relationship. So what does rotten communication look like? What does corrupt communication look like? Because you can just say, oh, well, don't speak bad things. What does it look like? So in a marriage and family, it could look like this. It could look like name calling and labels. Oh, you're so lazy. Oh, you're being crazy. Oh, you act just like your mother. That's some corrupt communication, by the way. Unless you have a great mother-in-law. If you have a great mother-in-law, then she might not take it that way, but it could be sarcasm that's used to wound. Man, some of us, we pick so hard at each other. You know what? I pick on everybody. You know, the one person I don't pick on my wife. Why? I'm not going to use sarcasm because sarcasm wounds and we dig and play with each other. And sometimes you might bring up even past sins that have already been confessed and forgiven, but it hurts. That's some corrupt communication. It doesn't build up any relationship. It could be threatening divorce or leaving just to get compliance. It could be saying, well, if you don't fix this, then I just can't be with you anymore. It could be not just threatening divorce, it could be threatening to break up. Like, oh, if you're going to do this thing, you better behave this way so we'll have a good relationship. Could do the same thing with our children. We can look at our parents and say, if you don't do what I think you should do, then I'm just never talking to you again. These happen across the board. Corrupt communication, it could be using a tone with your spouse that you would never dare use with your pastor or your boss or a friend. So a real concern delivered like an attack is still a sin. Most of us will say, well, I was right in what I said. They were wrong, and they're just mad because I gave them the truth. I'm like, no, they're mad because of the way that you said it. Because the way that you resolve conflict is saying, does this build the individual up? Now, that doesn't mean it's pleasant. I can speak something and say, hey, that's not pleasant, but it's for her benefit. It doesn't have to be pleasant, but it has to be for the other person's good, not just for my own release in the middle of an argument. So before we speak in the midst of an argument, typically I would ask myself, will this help us move forward, or will it make me win an argument? If someone recorded this and played it in church, would I be ashamed of what I said? That's a big one. But really the fact is that the Lord hears everything we say in the first place. So, lastly, let's look at number 3. We talked about what God's communication is and how to keep from anger, but how do you break that cycle of constant arguments? So, me and my wife have, for me, I have this thought always. I say, in this house, the problem is the problem, my spouse is not the problem. In this house, the problem is the problem, my spouse is not the problem. When we have conflicts, when we have arguments, and I do it with all my family. If I have a conflict with my brother, it's like, okay, the problem's the problem, my brother is not the problem. Okay, at work, my boss sometimes he might be the problem. It's like, my problem is the problem, my boss is not the problem. And that helps us begin to be able to solve the conflicts that we have in a godly way. In most marriages, the problem is not that you have a conflict. You're going to have a conflict in every relationship that you have. That's just the reality of it. You're going to have conflicts in all your relationships. Why? You are imperfect. But many couples live in this cycle of one doesn't show respect, so the other one doesn't either. And because that one didn't show it and the other one didn't show it. And it's a cycle. And it looks like this. A wife, she might feel dismissed or unheard, so she pushes harder and maybe say something critical or contentious words. And then the husband feels disrespected. So then he either explodes or he shuts down and walks away, and I don't want to talk about it. And then because he responded that way, when he responded that way, her reaction confirms her fear. Oh, he just doesn't care. See, he just walked away. He doesn't care. And then her reaction to his reaction says, nothing I do is good enough then. And you see the cycle, and round and round and round and round it goes. And that is every relationship. And every one of us have been there before. I'm mad because they said this. They're mad because I said that. And we're not even mad anymore about the conflict that took place in the beginning. And this affects every relationship that we have. In a Christ-centered relationship, you aren't trying to win. Now, we want to win, but the goal is not to win. In a Christ-centered marriage, my goal is to not win. You're trying to walk this life together. You're not fighting an opponent. You're not getting into a ring ready to spar someone that you woke up next to in the morning. You're trying to, you're mending a relationship with a teammate that's helping you live this Christian life. And it sounds simple to say, hey, just do what the Apostle Paul said here in this passage. It's easy. It sounds simple, but in that heat of the moment, we typically forget all of that stuff. That's why we say, in this house, the problem is the problem, my spouse is not the problem. And if we lived by that sentence, most of our arguments would just go away. Or the conflicts won't go away, but the arguments that we have in themselves typically will go away. So, I want to give a couple of common ways that men and women mishandle conflicts. Okay, so don't get mad at me. These are the common ways that men handle it and mishandle and women mishandle. So husbands, you're first. Most of us don't really try to ruin a marriage. We don't wake up and say, I'm going to ruin my marriage. But we do have habits that we look at as harmless, but to your wife, it hurts. Common patterns include a withdrawal. That means that you shut down, you leave the room, you go quiet, and it might be for days. And by the way, man, I am that person. In that midst of a moment, give me a moment to cool down. I don't want to talk. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation or you have to do it. You say it's cooling off, but she experiences that as punishment and abandonment in the midst of a hurt, okay? An easy solution, and I'll give a solution for that here in a moment, but I'm just giving some common patterns. So first of all, first it's withdrawal. Second, it's a fix it only. That means she starts sharing her hurt, and the moment that she starts sharing it, you start giving strategic solutions to fix it. And that's good. We are fix-it people. We want to fix it. But in that moment, she wants to hear you to listen first and understand, and then offer a plan. If we don't listen first, now we're bypassing her heart, and she feels neglected. Next is dismissive answers. And now, if the first two don't work, then we typically respond with dismissive answers. And what I mean is, you're just overreacting. You want to help your wife calm down? Tell her, honey, you need to calm down. Every man can laugh because they know that doesn't work. It's a dismiss. You're just overreacting. Or that's not what happened. Or you are just being way too sensitive right now. Men, if you really want to gaslight and they're getting really mad, just be like, I can't talk to you right now with your eyebrows looking like that. All right? Don't do that. I'm obviously kidding. But when you give dismissive answers, you think that you're correcting her perception. Be like, look, it is not that big of a deal. But really what you're saying is, look, your experience is invalid. It doesn't matter. Okay, women. Typically, you don't set out to say, I just want to be disrespectful to my husband. Nobody ever does that. Nobody sets out wanting to do that. And many wives try to fix their marriage, but with patterns that don't work. So the methods can feel like contempt or an attack. especially in the midst of a conflict. So some of the common patterns for wives, first of all, it's verbally overloading. Verbally overloading means that you pour out every grievance over the last 10 years in one conversation, and now your husband feels completely outmatched for the real issue that was there, and now he just shuts down. Because he's like, where did all these arguments come from? Then next one is globalizing. Wives, you do this a lot. It's globalizing. That it's like, you always do this. You never do. You always leave the trash on the floor. You never pick up your laundry. You never do the dishes. You always go out and do these things. You never tell me how beautiful I am. One of the biggest pet peeves from when my wife and I first got married was to set out, I don't do globalization. Don't ever say you always and never, because I'll time out that conversation, be like, can you tell me when the last time I did that? Okay, so it's not always. It's not never. But when you do that, what a husband hears is, look, you're telling him that he is a failure as a man, and that's not what you intend. You don't really intend to do that. Or it's public or private belittling. It's mocking him. It's a rolling of your eyes. It's a correcting every little detail. Or telling others how foolish he is. Most of us will say, I want my husband to lead, but in the moment he leads, it starts to lead, you don't like the way he leads. It's not that you want your husband to lead, you just want your husband to lead the way you want him to lead. But here in this, we see that there becomes public or private belittling. It tells, maybe you're telling others how foolish he is, or what those things, mocking him, rolling your eyes, correcting every little detail, what that tells him is, you think, well, I'm just being honest so he can do better. What he hears is, look, I'm small in my wife's eyes, apparently. When you do these things, men and women, your wives, they're going to feel disrespected or unloved. You can't yell a man into godly leadership. You're just not going to be able to do that. You can't shame a person into Christ-likeness. That's not going to happen. Respect is not pretending that your spouse is perfect, but it is choosing to address what's wrong without tearing each other down. So, I want to give a marriage conflict toolbox, and we can use this for every relationship. A toolbox to how to resolve proper conflicts. So, because we talked about James 1, Proverbs 15, Ephesians 4, and that's easy. Living that's a little bit different. Okay, so first, how to have a godly argument. Now that it seems counterintuitive, but you're going to have a godly argument. First of all, I call the time in, which means before I go to an individual that I have an issue with, or mainly my spouse, but in any relationship, I first pray. Say, Lord, guard my mouth to say the words that I'm meant to say. And then after that, I go to the person or my spouse in this situation and say, is now a good time to be talking about something that's been bothering me? And if it's not a good time, then I'm not talking about it, but we will set a time within the next 24 hours to talk about it, because I'm not letting the sun go down on my wrath. So, you have an issue with somebody, pray first, and then ask them if you can talk about it. It gives them ample time to know what's happening. It's starting with permission and clarity. It helps a person be able to garner their thoughts rather than just feeling like they're attacked or blindsided. So call time in. After that, define the problem in one sentence. Now, most of us, when we have an argument with somebody, we want to list out every single grievance that we have. Define the problem. If you cannot say in one sentence what you're actually trying to solve, then you're not ready to have an argument. You're not ready to have a conversation. Define the issue in one sentence. Say, like, I want to talk about how we speak about in front of each other, in front of the kids. That's one sentence. I want to talk about our spending last month. That's one sentence. I want to talk about how we handle our in-law visits. That's one sentence. Write it down if you need to. You stay on topic. And if another topic comes up in the midst of that argument, then you have to say, okay, I understand what you're saying. That matters too, and we will talk about that later and pick a different time to talk about that. Because in that conflict, you were trying to resolve a conflict, not win an argument. So in the midst of that, you address the one conflict. You can go and talk about that other conflict later, but as of right now, we're staying on track for one conflict. And then after that, take turns talking and listening. Now that means that the person that comes, give them 3 to 5 minutes of speaking, of where they can talk uninterrupted And then you're going to talk for 3 to 5 minutes uninterrupted. Now, that just is going to seem very mechanical. You're not going to like that at first, because the reason is that when your spouse says something, or when the relationship, when you have a hard time, you don't want to listen. You want to win. You want to come out on top and make them feel dumb. That's really what it is when we interrupt in the midst of a conflict that's trying to be resolved. And if you really have to, you can say, look, the other repeats back what you heard and say, look, what you're saying is this, and it makes you feel like this. Is that right? And like I said, that might make you feel very mechanical, but it's retraining our brain on how to have good conflict resolution. Like I said, it's gonna bother you at first, but you're retraining bad habits. It's not going to be easy to retrain all bad habits. The goal is not the performance and how you guys are speaking at it. The goal is understanding. I need to understand why this conflict is here. You're not blaming your spouse. Really what you're doing, you must own your side of that cycle, because this cycle is going to be constant. You understand where you fell, and then you choose the opposite. Even though I feel disrespected, I want to show my wife love anyways. And my wife would be, even though even though I feel unloved, I want to show respect anyways. If I feel disrespected, I want to show love. And even though I feel unloved, I'm going to respond with respect. That's how you start to get this cycle to slow down, where you can actually resolve the conflict rather than attacking each other. And then after this, attack the problem, not the person. I'm certain everybody has been part of when a conflict arises and we start to lose a conflict, we start with the character attacks. And we want to attack everything about the individual. Adopt the rule, the problem is the problem, my spouse is not the problem. That means that I genuinely believe that my spouse has my best interest at heart. If me and this is every relationship, if me and Coach Joe has an argument, we have a conflict, and I'm going to go to Coach Joe about a conflict, I instantly say, I believe that Coach Joe has my best interest at heart. We just have a conflict. That is how you approach these topics. Attack the problem, not the person. If instantly Coach Joe made me mad, and I'm messing with him because I know I can, if instantly he makes me mad, and instead of saying, okay, he has my best interest at heart, we have a conflict, I instantly go to him and says, you did this, and you got a peanut head and big old ears, and I can't believe, why would you do that? We've missed the whole point of our conversation. And you can be the judge if he has big ears and a peanut head. Okay, so the point is that the problem is the problem, the person is not the problem. So there's no character assassinations that are going to take place. You're just, when a conflict, you're just selfish, you're just controlling, you're just immature. Those are character assassinations that typically arise in these kind of conflicts. Your spouse is not your enemy. Sin is your enemy. The adversary is your enemy. You have to let your words and your body language show the difference of who's the enemy. And then after that, keep it current. Don't stockpile a bunch of small offenses to unload them months later. It's like, well, 5 years ago on this date, and here you said this to me, and you spoke to that person that way. Look, if something was big enough to change how you treat your spouse, it's big enough to talk about it within a reasonable amount of time. If it was big enough to change your perspective of your spouse, it was big enough to speak about it right then. If it wasn't big enough to speak about it right then that means it's time to let it go. Don't stockpile your offenses. Ask yourself, am I upset about the conflict today, or am I just upset about everything over the last 5 years? And if it is the last 5 years, then you need more than having a godly argument. You need a season of deep repair and possibly some outside help. And there's nothing wrong with that either, to get counseling for having a good relationship. And so the question is then, lastly, we're going to close. When do you need outside help? I said there is nothing wrong, no matter how long you've been together or what kind of relationship it is, there's nothing wrong with having outside help. You don't know everything, and you're not the first person to go through the same trials. Some couples will hear all of this, and saying, well, look, we're just too far gone for ground rules and paraphrases and understanding how to talk to each other. If shouting and degradation and stonewalling and manipulation or ongoing unfaithfulness has been hardened over the years, you may need help just beyond just hearing some ground rules for a debate. And by the way, that's not failure. That means that I want to fix this and I want to have a good, healthy relationship. So in that, involve a wise counselor, a wise biblical counselor, not just friends who are going to take your sides. Because, man, every time you have an argument, you call your friend and tell them all about your side of it, and they're all going to side with you. By the way, sometimes people will side with you to the detriment of your relationships. There are some people that say, well, they love me. Yes, and I know I'm not going to call them for advice because they're going to tell me everything I want to hear. You're not the first couple to get stuck. You're not the first set of people to have conflicts in relationships, and you're not going to be the last. So the question is not whether conflict is hard. Conflict's going to be hard because we're imperfect. The question is whether you're going to submit to Christ's way to resolve conflicts. God cares how you talk. He cares how you manage your relationships. Conflict's a part of life. You're not going to walk away and not have it. Unchecked anger, careless words, buried hurt, that brings damage. So we need to make sure that we aren't allowing damage to inflict the relationships that we care most about. You're not going to win every argument, and that's the point. The point's not to win. You're not supposed to. In a Christ-centered marriage and having godly relationships, winning is not the goal. Unity is the goal. I need to care more about being unified with my spouse than I need to care about winning. And by the way, to close with this, we have taken this two completely different directions where sometimes just listen to your husband and that'll be happy, and nobody agrees with that. But we also have arrived at this point where it says, well, happy wife, happy life. Neither of those are godly. If it's always happy wife, happy life, then we have missed the points on what a godly relationship is supposed to look like. If we have arrived at the point where it says that your husband's always right and I don't argue with him and question him, then that's not right either. There's no unity in that. There's no oneness in that. Conflicts are going to rise. In every relationship you have, the question is how you're going to break the cycle of the issue. Let's pray. Lord, I pray you help us today to be able to take this to heart for conflicts that we have. And Lord, this can apply to every relationship we have. Our friends, our parents, our boyfriend and girlfriends, our spouse, our children. Lord, I pray that you help us to begin to resolve conflict in a godly way so that we can have the relationships that we're meant to have. And Lord, I pray that you speak to our hearts. Help us to think of all the things that you've forgiven us for so that we can have that same kind of grace for others as well. With every head bowed and every eye closed, we stand to our feet and say, Pastor, I'm here today, and I want to have godly relationships.